Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. Today's guest is Will Small. We got introduced through a mutual friend, and man, I'm glad we had this conversation. Will is a poet, a preacher, a storyteller, a leader, and an all-round nice guy. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a heap, and I know that you guys are going to learn a heap as well. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey Will, welcome to the show, mate.
So good to be on the show. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for coming on. Mate, I've been looking forward to catching up with you for quite a while now, since a mutual friend of ours prompted me to chat to you. So I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah, me too. It was, I don't get too many sort of out of the blue invitations to be on podcasts, but I'm like a podcast junkie. I listen to them all the time. I've, make a few of them. So to be on somebody else's podcast is really cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're stoked. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was I, as you do, did a bit of a Facebook stalk and checked out your business that you've got going on, and we'll talk about it a bit later. But I noticed that you are a poet, which is really cool. So I just wanted to ask you to get going. What was the thing that made you sort of fall in love with poetry?
It's a good question. I mean, it is sort of a funny thing. I often joke about kind of accidentally becoming a poet. Like no kid sets out in the modern world to become a poet when they grow up. And I was an ordinary high school student who thought poetry was dusty and boring and really completely irrelevant to my life. But at the same time, I loved hip hop music, and that was weird in itself, right? Like I was a little white privileged kid growing up in Canberra, and suddenly a friend burnt me a CD with like some Tupac songs on it, and it changed my life. And but then I realized, like, I guess, as time went on, I kind of realized I was a bit of a hypocrite because I pretended like I thought poetry was really, really stupid and boring, but I loved poetry over beats. So at first I wanted to be just the greatest rapper in the world. That was really, my goal. Yeah. And, there's some awkward footage and memories from that time. But basically I had a teacher in year 12 who said to me, "Oh, you should go to this, thing called a poetry slam," which, more people know about what that is now, mainly through 22 Jump Street. I didn't really know what that was, but basically the poster said, you can't have any props, you can't have any music. It's just 2 minutes, your voice and a microphone. And it sounded real raw and kind of battle rapish. So I went along. Oh, wow. And there's a really eclectic mix of people. Like there were some other kind of wannabe MCs like myself, and there was a freestyle bush poet. There was like, some old poets, some young poets. But everyone just got 2 minutes to share their story, and it was a pretty fascinating night, and it kind of hooked me in. I've been doing it ever since. So, yeah.
That sounds awesome. So what is slam poetry? Is that kind of that battling side of it?
Yeah. So basically it's a confusing world these days because, I used to, I guess, really go by the term slam poet, and I don't anymore. I prefer just to be a poet or spoken word poet. But basically what slam is, it started by a guy named Mark Smith in Chicago in the 80s, he was a poet. He would go to poetry readings at, like bookshops or pubs or whatever, and just felt like it was so boring and everyone was falling asleep, even the poet. And he was like, man, when did poetry become something that was kind of like just for the academic elite, for these really, really boring kind of poets? And he was like, no, we've got to take it back to the people. Poetry used to be something, you think about Shakespeare and everyone was into it. He was like the Eminem of his day. So basically,
they kind of like shaped the English language.
100%.
In a way.
100%.
Yeah.
And so, basically this Mark Smith dude says, well, anyone should be able to be a poet. Doesn't matter, whether they're like really crap or not. Anyone should be able to have a crack at it. At the same time, anyone should be able to judge that poetry and say that's rubbish. You don't have to have kind of a degree to be able to critique it. Any average person should be able to say, man, that's just not moving me in any interesting way at all. So
Yeah.
basically, yeah, the poetry slam is like a competition. You know, poets get 2 minutes, and you've just got to do whatever you can, just your voice within those 2 minutes. So people get pretty creative, you know, and it really, yeah, that time limit, I guess, forces people. You got to be on it, and then you've also got this audience which are going to judge you harshly. So kind of,
Yeah, wow.
yeah,
Sounds pretty intense, but it also sounds like it would be a heap of fun at the same time, like
it
from
is,
that
yeah.
creative aspect.
It's really eye opening.
Yeah.
Like I've found that, you know, I sort of run a spoken word night, which isn't quite a slam. It's not really a competition, but it's a similar vibe. Like we have DJs, and it's got a real sort of hip hop vibe, and
Yeah,
you know,
awesome.
it's a great night. But for me, one of the powerful things about slams and spoken word nights has been it's exposed me to all sorts of worldviews and people that I normally wouldn't hang out with. You know, and
Yeah,
I've
that's
heard
true.
poems from refugees. I've heard people from, you know, homeless people. I've heard poetry from people younger than me, older than me, totally different life experiences, and yet somehow kind of it creates this space where all of those stories are listened to and honoured, and it's very cool.
That is so cool. Yeah, that would be incredible actually. Because if I'm being 100% honest, the only real exposure I've had to poetry, besides I guess in music or some things I've seen on YouTube, like in person to person, was I remember going to a library and there was this guy must have been 90, I
Right.
reckon, but it was like I can see looking back on it that it would have been a beautiful thing, but I didn't know how to appreciate it at the time, and it kind of I just had no idea what it was. So
Yeah.
that's so good that you are a part of bringing it kind of, as you were saying, being more relevant and um, I guess something that, like as you said, you don't have to be an academic to do it, and you don't have, like, kind of like the art world. I
Yeah.
feel as well is becoming more and more like that. You used to go to art galleries and look
Yeah,
at
for
things
sure.
and go, "Oh, I that doesn't do anything for me," but you'd whisper that because people might think you're not interpreting it correctly.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
might get
but
kicked
I feel
out.
like now it's becoming a lot more open. I'm sure there still are places where that is very frowned upon, but yeah, that's really cool, man.
Yeah, and then I guess the reality of that is that this stuff is all around us. Like it's just we don't often recognize where it is. You know,
Yeah.
like we everyone listens to music,
Mm.
and so many of us, like there are lyrics that, you know, uh, that have spoken to our exact experience of life. You know, to the point where people are, you know, regularly tattooing lyrics on themselves, but you know they just haven't learned to see that that's poetry. And
Yeah.
that was probably the big shift for me. Was not that, like, it was like I'd always liked poetry. I just had a really small, boxed in definition of what it was, and then that expanded and kind of continues to expand. I see poetry in great speeches. You know, I see it in kind of everyday conversation where people just use like a turn of phrase. Like my son, who's 3 years old now, I think maybe a year ago, like he's just 2 year old, and he sees like one of those planes, you know, that leaves a sort of trail behind it in the sky, and he's like, "Daddy, like that plane is tearing the sky." And I was
Mm.
blown away. I was like, "That's the best line of poetry that I've heard in
Yeah.
a long time." As a 2 year old just observing the world.
Just
So
that phrasing, isn't it?
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. It sounds so cool, and when you notice it, like there's a fella that I like. He's on YouTube. His name's Jay Shetty. He does a lot of like motivational things like that. Um, but I was trying to figure out why does his videos sound so flippin' cool? And I watched him in an interview, and he, like you, has a love for poetry, a love for spoken word and language, and has kind of just figured out a way to put that into something that's educational at the same time.
Mm.
But you're learning, but it feels like it's just a guy speaking, but it feels like you're in the middle of a song or something, and
Yeah, gotcha.
it does do it does something to you in a way. It sounds a bit silly, I guess, but it not only hits your head, but it'll hit your heart as well. Like there's something about
For
what
sure.
music does to you. Like you listen, I'm a bit of a hip hop fan as well, and you listen to some of these some rappers, and they've got like it's just a really good groove, and their lyrics are just really good. It's unexplainable. You're like, I don't know why this
Yeah.
song sounds so good, but it feels even better.
Yeah, and you should feel it. I think that's, I think a lot of people think about poetry and they think about something that they have to like mentally work
Mm.
to understand and engage with, and it's kind of just totally a brain thing. But I think great poetry, like great music or great art, like it should be, like you're saying, it's something that you can feel but you can't quite explain. It's just doing something that you're experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that all good, well, good is a subjective term, I guess, but any creative, um, what am I trying to say? Anything that you are creating that is going to impact people comes from that place. You know what I mean? Like I
Mm,
don't imagine there's much sort of famous artwork out there or music where people have purely created it because there's a system and they think it's going to sound good.
mm,
Like I think there's a
yeah.
little bit of that, especially in some of like today's music, but anything that's really stood the time has come
Mm,
out of a story and it's come out of the heart. And
absolutely.
yeah, and it's really, I'm really interested in how that works and how then it's like transference as well. How then it impacts other people, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's so good. So where's that leading to you now? So you said you're running a what did you call it?
Like a spoken word night. Yeah, it's kind of on a little hiatus at the moment, just to kind of uh, dream about how it can be
Okay.
fresh, because I've been running it for 4 years and it's kind of become a little bit, just set and forget. And I want to have fresh energy for it. So having a bit of a break, but planning to relaunch. But it's called Speak Up. And basically, the concept at the beginning was, you know, uh, every Speak Up night has an open mic for anyone who wants to jump up and do a poem or rap or whatever. And then there's always a feature poet, someone who's sort of been doing it for a while and is really going to give people that experience and that journey. And then there's always live art, somebody up the front painting something visual while the poetry is happening, and then, often a DJ or something like that. So really cool night.
That sounds fantastic. And whereabouts is that?
It was happening, and probably will happen again at a little venue that I helped to set up and establish for a crew called Musicians Making a Difference. I finished up with those guys at the end of last year, and am starting a new creative endeavor. But yeah, basically it was kind of a creative community venue that was helping to raise funds for youth programs with vulnerable young people locally. So it was kind of all coming full circle. Really cool night.
Yeah, that's so
And then
good.
the funds from that night went into youth programs.
Ah, that's great. And so that's based in like the Central Coast of New South Wales, is it?
Yes, in the art capital of Australia, Gosford.
Gosford, yeah, nice, awesome. Have you always lived
I
in
say that
Gosford?
with a lot of sarcasm.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I moved to Gosford. I moved to the Central Coast 5 years ago from Canberra,
Okay.
and but I actually love it. Like it is one of those places like Canberra that people joke about. I suppose people probably joke about most places when they live
Yeah,
there, but
yeah. I joke
um,
about Brisbane a lot. There's not a lot happening here, in my opinion, but I'm sure.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
yeah. See, that's funny because I would think Brisbane's cool, but um, then again, maybe you think
yeah.
Canberra's cool.
The
I don't
grass
know.
is always greener, I think, on the
That's
somewhere
right.
else.
That's
Yeah,
right. I mean, I don't think too many people are having those sort of vibes in Melbourne or New York or Paris
yeah,
or whatever. But for everywhere else is
yeah.
kind of self-conscious.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I don't imagine there's a New Yorker out there going, "Man, I'd love to live in the suburbs of Brisbane." But
Yeah.
you never know. Who
Well,
knows?
yeah, you never know. That's right.
Exactly. So, what prompted the move from Canberra to Gosford?
It's sort of basically no amazing reason. I'd grown up in Canberra all my life. Uh, my wife, like I just been, we were married a year before we moved, and she lived in Canberra all her life. And we actually were just going for a walk one night, and we did have this conversation about like if you could just live anywhere in the world right now, where would it be? And we kind of came up with our top three. And there was like the overseas New York sort of dream, and then there was like Melbourne kind of was our city in Australia that seems the coolest. But then we were like, but somewhere that's a bit closer, a bit more achievable. We'd love to live at the coast, and the Central Coast where we are is sort of just above Sydney. It's very easy to go into Sydney for for the benefits of the city and arts and culture, but at the same time, it's more coastal and chilled out. And my brother had moved up here about a year beforehand. We visited a couple times, and we were like, yeah, if we could make it work, it seems like it'd be a nice place to kind of just have a trial run, move for a year, and then if we find that we're really missing Canberra, we'll go back there or we'll go somewhere else. But we fell in love with this place, and we've had 2 kids here, and I guess met lifelong friends, people that will be lifelong friends here. So yeah, I think we're going to be sticking around for a while.
What do you reckon was the thing that really made you fall in love with the place?
It's a good question because there are a lot of things to not fall in love with. It's an interesting place, and particularly I moved up to do youth work, and where I was doing youth work was in one of the places in Australia with the highest rates of domestic violence and the highest rates of kids skipping out on school. And there's problems like there is anywhere, but they seemed really in my face. So I think for us, honestly, we just met really good people really early, and we have friends now that we've all kind of had kids at the same time, and we've gone through our life falling apart a little bit with with that together, and the amazing, beautiful aspect of that as well. It's all bundled in, but yeah, and just people that really have been incredibly loving for us at times when we've needed it, and that's always the way, isn't it? Like, we love the place, we love living near the beach, and there's something about the environment which is naturally really beautiful, but obviously when you meet good people, that changes everything. So
yeah, it's the people that are around you are key. It's like we were just talking about New York City before. I remember watching it was only yesterday actually. I was watching like a vlog on YouTube, and it was a guy who had lived in New York City for a year and still hadn't met anybody. So
wow.
he was pouring out his heart on YouTube. Probably not something I would have done, but he said he'd never been lonelier.
Yeah.
And he'd moved there because he'd seen it was the place where everything happens and everybody knows everybody and this sort of thing. So it is so true. If you don't have a group of people that you can love and trust and that love you around you, anywhere doesn't feel like a nice place.
And it's probably a common experience, like moving somewhere thinking it's going to be amazing because of the arts and the culture or the job opportunities or the economy or whatever. And if you don't meet those people early on, you can be incredibly lonely in an amazing place.
Especially if you're not a super extroverted person. If you're I'm not an extrovert. I think I'm an extrovert, but I'm a pretty shy extrovert. So somewhere like that, if I was to move there, it would take every ounce of effort, I reckon, to go out of my way to meet these different people. I think it'd be pretty tough, to be honest.
For sure. I think we were lucky. I think, there's definitely an element of just, you put yourself out there and make the effort, but you also you get lucky sometimes. And we often say, we sort of say, man, these people, they seem to love us as much as we love them, which feels crazy because we think we're pretty ordinary. And, that's awesome when you meet people that see something in you. And you just feel like, it's crazy when it's, mutual like that.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's so good that you found those people as well. So it sounds like you are going to be there for a while, which is good.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to talk to you about this next venture that you kind of hinted before, which I think it's the one that we're both talking about, called Lead by Story. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a famous Steve Jobs speech where he talks about connecting the dots. And I'm not comparing myself to Steve Jobs, in any significant real way, but he talks about how he dropped out of uni and then ended up back at uni and sort of ended up going to some calligraphy classes. And I don't even think he was an enrolled student. He just went because he was interested in calligraphy and kind of learnt some of the basic concepts. And somewhere during that time, he actually had been fired from Apple, the company he started. And when he went back to Apple, it was post doing these calligraphy classes for no kind of formal credit. And when sort of the first, Mac computer came out, one of the reasons it was successful was because it was the first computer that had multiple fonts, which was because of doing calligraphy.
Yeah, wow.
So really cool speech and cool story. It's sort of one of those things that stuck with me. But, he talks about that idea of you just don't know how the dots are going to connect, but they will. Nothing's a waste. Everything you do can kind of become part of what you end up doing. And for me, since I guess getting really into poetry, I feel like I've had sort of that open question around, I love this, and spoken word and poetry has been a big part of my life, but what do you do with it? And I studied English and philosophy at university. It's like honestly the most abstract and unemployable degree that you can do. And then found myself, I loved it, but it sort of was, definitely didn't have any clear idea of what the job was going to be at the other end of it. But I didn't really care about that, which I think is probably a good thing. I was just sort of pursuing what I was interested in. And found myself doing youth work and sort of starting to mash up, these elements of poetry and wanting to get kids more connected with English, and how I found that poetry was also helping with other sort of issues, like helping to build confidence and helping people to form their identity, basically. And so some dots started to connect, but there was still kind of a bit of a missing link. And I found that I've sort of swung between at different times, feeling like I'm either really into my own creative practice and I'm writing and it's awesome, but it sort of doesn't feel like it's doing much in the world. Or I've had these moments where I'm really into, running great events for other poets, or running, workshops in schools, mentoring a lot of writers and poets, but I end up stopping my own creative practice. So I've sort of had this ongoing, kind of tension of how do I be authentically, the poet, the writer, the voice that I am, while also being true to this part of me that wants to help develop others and wants to help others to become better at using their own voice to achieve their vision in the world. And then also just kind of going, how do I carve out a career that is, true to my passion, but also is sustainable and viable and adds value to the world beyond just in my head. So anyway, long story short, the way my dots have started to connect is, really realizing that actually, even though poetry still seems like something that's pretty niche, there aren't a whole huge number of poets that are really just, killing it in pure poetry world.
Yeah, it's not the most sort of mainstream, I guess, to coin the term.
No, that's right. And there are a few poets, like the spoken word thing. There's definitely a few spoken word poets which are, they've been able to be really successful purely from their poetry. But I've kind of found that for me, the way that that's really been able to find full expression is actually going, well, the skills of a poet are useful for anyone. And when I think about what the skills of a poet are, like, I mean, being able to squeeze the biggest and most, sort of like tangible, huge ideas, squeeze them into the fewest, best, most punchy words.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think everyone could benefit from that, right? There's so much noise in our world. There's so many messages. It's hard for anything to be heard or to cut through. So basically, Lead by Story is kind of about me continuing to produce my own work and to use, my own platform to write books and to write poetry and to make podcasts and do fun creative stuff. But at the same time, I want to get alongside any communicators, whether they're teachers or whether they're business owners or whether they're public speakers or whether they're, entrepreneurs, and really help people to actually use the skills of a poet to become better at clarifying exactly what they do, why it matters, and how they can move people into action, whatever that looks like for them. That's
so good. That is, and I think that you have found an enormous need, to be honest. I look at probably about a year ago, I was beginning to sort of mission statements and finding what is my mission statement and
Mm,
vision statements and I go, oh, this is a good one, and I'd spend all this time writing it out, and it's almost a page long.
yeah,
No,
sure.
probably not, half a page. I'm like, there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to remember any of that. And also, half of it, like 90% of it, does not need to be on that page.
Yeah,
And you look at some of these other businesses and things, and you go onto their website and you go to their About Us, and I have a pretty short attention span. I've probably got ADHD or something, to be honest, but I don't even last on the page because there's just too many words. Like, I don't know what you guys are about,
yeah,
but so that's awesome if you can use those passions that you have and that creative art to then also help other sort of businesses and people, like you said, and public speakers, or anyone really that wants to communicate uh, anything, that's so good.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's the poetry, which I guess is about getting the language sharp and effective and making sure that it has cut through. And then the other side is obviously the storytelling, which is about that fact that the one thing that does engage people for great lengths of time is story. Like you get lost on that about page on the website, but you can sit and
Mm,
watch a 2 hour movie and be captivated the whole time because that's as humans we're narrative
yeah.
driven creatures. We want things uh, to be following the arc of a story. So those two tools, getting really sharp with your language like a poet and understanding how to use story to bring people in and to captivate them. I think those are, and this I do a lot of work in schools. Run a lot of spoken word poetry workshops, and speak to a lot of kids like me that think poetry has nothing to do with my life. I don't want to become a poet, but it's really being able to tell those kids, well, actually, there are things that you would want to change in the world. No one's going to listen to you if you just do a little ranty Facebook post. But if you actually learn how to use these skills, then you can grab people's ears and change the way people see the world. So yeah, it's powerful stuff.
It is certainly powerful stuff, and I think, as you said before, there's just so much noise out there at the moment. It's just got even on Instagram. I've just started getting back into Instagram, trying to promote this podcast and
Yeah,
things like that. And man, some of it, you have a photo, but I have no idea what you are trying to
yeah,
say right now. And then you hit the see more, and it's about 10 paragraphs of writing or something. You're like, I don't know if it's just me, but yeah, I haven't got the time to search through all of that to try and figure out what's going on there. But then you look at
for
people
sure.
who obviously have got it going on. It might be two lines or even a line, but something about what they've written just hits you. You go, bam, that's powerful, or that's um,
Yeah, for sure.
like a good
100%.
quote. Like a good quote. You can kind of look at it and you go instantly, what it is and how you can use it in your own life.
Yeah, and there's all these, like, I do a fair bit of speaking. I'm also a couple of days a week I'm a pastor at a local church,
Okay.
and that's like my side hustle.
Yeah.
But
It's a good side hustle to have.
yeah, no, I love it, and it definitely that's a part of, for me. I want to always be in two spaces. I don't want to be there, full time. Sort of in that can become a bit insular, can become a bit of a bubble. But at the same time, if I wasn't there in some capacity, I feel like I would be also not being fully true to a significant part of myself. So that balance is important. But there's all this depressing stuff, right? Like I regularly give, I regularly preach, which essentially, I'm basically giving a monologue for 20 or 30 minutes. But there's all this stuff around, 15 minutes later, people have forgotten 90 something percent of what you've said if you communicate in that kind of format. Um, and it's true not just for preachers, it's
Mm.
true for anyone who does lengthy speaking. And it's why TED Talks are, like, generally pretty concise, like they're under 15 minutes. And I did this thing a couple of years ago. There's a group in Australia called the Funding Network. They might actually be international, but the Australian Funding Network, they run these events where they
Okay.
basically get three individuals who are from different non-profits, and they take them through some coaching around how to pitch ideas to funders. And you have to come up with a 6-minute pitch. And then they put the three people from the three different nonprofits in a room with wealthy people. And you basically each give your 6-minute pitch, and then they do live crowdfunding. And on the night, you walk away with, a pretty decent chunk of money for your project. But there was this whole thing in that as well about like people are going to remember from 6 minutes the same that they would remember from 60 minutes. So if you feel like you need more time, you're not actually giving people more information. You're just, again, adding to that noise, adding to that, that stuff that people have to continue to be confused by or wade through. So it's like it's sort of a bit depressing for people that do speak longer than that. But at the same time, it's kind of this empowering thing that, hey, you know what? If you got something to say, you can cut it back to the essence, and you should be able to communicate it to people, in a sentence or in a brief conversation or in a 6-minute pitch.
And if you really, really know your stuff, then you should be able to do that as well. I think a lot of the times, even for me, I tried starting a couple of businesses before, and I probably didn't know my why enough. And so when people would ask me, "Oh, so what is this business? What's it about?" I would spend all this time trying to explain, probably more trying to explain to myself what it was. But I could just look in their eyes and see that they're on another planet now. They've just glazed over. And so, but I now see that, one of the examples, I guess, is that you probably watched the TV show Shark Tank, where they come and do their pitching. And you can definitely see what you're talking about there, where you've got the guys who, within 2 minutes of walking in, they've pretty much got all those investors on the edge of their seat going, how can I be a part of this? Because they've been able to tell a story. Whereas you've got some that by the end of their allotted time, there's so many questions from the sharks or the investors because they're still trying to figure out what's going on, so
yes.
And when you're asking for a lot of money, you want to be concise and clear, that's for sure.
100%.
What do you reckon I don't know if this is possible, but what do you reckon are some tips for anyone that's listening for anything in their life? Say they've got a personal sort of mission statement that they want to work on. Are there any sort of simple tips that you can give people to start the process of making?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first tip, and a practice of mine, which I am often teaching groups of people, is, sounds a bit funny, but it's healthy to take a dump regularly, right? It's actually a good thing to take a dump every day. If you don't do that, you don't want to face the consequences of just letting things build up.
Yeah.
So there is a time to just get all the noise out and to just get everything that's swimming around in our mess of a brain, out of our brain. And so when I'm in a healthy rhythm of life, I start every day doing a dump and just, the stuff that's in my brain, just writing it down, whether it's, just the household chores I've got to do or the big ideas I'm kicking around or the things that I'm processing, things that I haven't quite resolved in my mind. And when we do just like fill our life with stimulus all the time, we're just constantly like listening to podcasts or watching Netflix or on the go, and we don't create space to let stuff out, then we actually, we're not doing ourselves any favors, and we lose the ability to get to that real essence and core, our why, like you were speaking about. So the first thing I would recommend to people is to do that, like get everything out. And that's not for public, that's just for yourself. Put it on a page, do a dump, even just put on a timer, just put on a 3-minute timer. And from the beginning of that timer, your pen can't stop moving until the end. And you'll be amazed at what comes out. But then you don't leave it there.
Okay.
The next step is, as you kind of develop a practice like that of getting things out and seeing everything before you, then you go back and you kind of do the work of seeing what are the repeating themes, what are the things that keep coming up, what are the key words. And out of that, the work of editing, any great piece of work, any great piece of writing or music or whatever, like usually has had more removed than added, after a certain point. You think about, I think there's a quote, Michelangelo about the statue of David. Basically, David's in the in the piece of marble or whatever, and all he did was to remove. There's no adding; it's just removal. So you got to have something to remove from,
Mm.
though. So basically, my tip for people is get everything out there, but don't put everything out there publicly. That's what a lot of people do. Get everything out there privately, and then do that work of
Yes. Yeah.
identifying what are the things that keep coming up. What would it look like to cut every single word here that is just adding noise, that is insignificant, and what am I left with? And that's the thing I'm going to continue to refine and revisit, and it is going to become the thing that I eventually can share really confidently with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good. So that just, as you said, looks like just grabbing a piece of paper and a pen, setting a timer, just going for it for 3 minutes, writing down whatever comes to your head. I'm guessing there's no formula. You're not
Yeah,
trying to think through
no, you
things
want
at
to
that
you want
time.
to avoid that, and part of it is getting to the other side of our brain. Like we often we're very used to in our culture operating in our kind of logical, rational brain, where we're very critical of our
Mm.
ideas that are a little bit out there, and makes it hard to be creative. So part of the dump is about just getting like snapping yourself out of that rational, judgmental, critical mindset, and just getting into that free, exploring, creative space. And what that then does is actually you find all these things that have been kind of dwelling in your subconscious that you've been sort of not allowing yourself to get to. But often it's in those places where you find the gold. It's in those places where you find the kind of deeper parts of you that you've ignored or neglected for a long time. So yeah, nothing more powerful than just doing a
Yeah,
dump every day.
I'll take that on board. That sounds like, yeah, I've never done anything like that, so I'm definitely going to start doing that. Because for me, especially, I found even in the last, probably 6 months. So I originally started this podcast. Would have been the first episode that I did was 3 or 4 months ago now, I think. And
Right?
I think I was in that situation where I just had so much stuff in my head that I just couldn't think about what I actually wanted to do, or I had all this
Yeah,
stuff in my head that I thought I could understand, but then if somebody asked me what's in your head, there's no chance. And I actually went and saw like a counselor to try and talk about how do I get this stuff out of my head. And
yeah,
similar to what you're saying, but I think I probably did it more instead of writing it down, it was actually just talking to somebody who would listen.
yeah. And that's a great. I think that's actually an awesome move. Like I see a counselor, and I probably will do that now for the
Mm.
rest of my life. I probably had a bit of stigma about doing that beforehand, but now I'm like, man, just being able to talk to somebody and again do a verbal dump with someone outside of my regular context is such a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's so freeing. I had so much stigma around it as well. And then yeah, when I went there, I was blown away. It just even like the first time I went there, you kind of come away going, that was interesting. It was a different
Yeah,
experience, even though it was just talking to somebody. It wasn't that scary or anything. But then definitely the second time when my counselor kind of then started to almost started to help me with that editing side.
yeah,
That
gotcha.
was incredible. I was like, "Wow, this is
Yeah,
powerful. Everybody needs to do this.
for sure.
That's for sure." Yeah, it was incredible. The one thing I was just going to say there as well is, so people that do this dump, then they do the editing. Do you reckon is there much of a formula then to try and, I think just from my personal experience, I've sort of done this work and then I've come up with say 2 or 3 things, and I'm going, man, what do I run with now? Like, um, how have you
Yeah,
found that in your experience? Like, I'm guessing with the poetry side of things, it sounds like that's been a real passion of yours, for a long time, and you've kind of gone with that. Do you have any sort of tips or, trying to think tips or methods of kind of just picking that one thing and going all in on it? I don't know if that makes sense at all, or
yeah. I mean, it's funny because I know that like my personality type. Not sure if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 7, which is kind
Oh
of
yeah,
people
love
that
it.
love to just start things aren't necessarily
Oh,
the
okay.
strongest at finishing them. Very enthusiastic at the beginning, and always sort of looking for a new adventure. So I personally struggle with this. Like I definitely find that I am probably similar to you in what you were sharing before. I always have more ideas in my head. More. I feel like I'm coming up with a new podcast concept every day, and I'm really having to kind of rein myself in. And that
Yeah.
self awareness is huge in that. Like self awareness, obviously, is a significant tool in being able to recognize that and then go, okay, I need to do less. Um, but I do think that a thing that I've learned and continue to learn is that things take longer than I normally would want them to. And doing things, my counselor actually mentioned the other day, um, it was in a different context, but he's talking about when you're really processing some complex things, slow is fast. If you want to actually do the work, and you don't want to do it a second time, then you need to go slow. And I've found that, like, I'm about to
Mm.
put out my first printed collection of poetry, and it's got poetry in there that's been written over the last 10 years. And there's some stuff in there from 10 years ago that
Wow.
I'm like, this has stood the test of time, mainly because it actually looks kind of like some of the things I'm still writing about. Whereas there are other things that from 10 years ago, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that version of me existed. I never want to see that again. But it's kind of that, that journey of time. You realize that there are, I think, some key themes in your life. And, it's where people might use a word like calling. It takes a while. And I'm not going to be naive and pretend that I've kind of arrived at all of this stuff completely. But I see certain things that just keep coming up, and I see that because things like doing the dump, things like the Enneagram, even like that self awareness stuff, helps me to kind of recognize repeating patterns so that I can really go, there's something here that I need to sit with.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I probably like my gut instinct and probably our culture's gut instinct is like, yeah, I want to come up with a vision. I want to come up with a vision statement. I want to have this really concise, thing. So I'm gonna set aside 1 hour to do it this Thursday afternoon or whatever. When that stuff, and I mean, set aside the one
Yeah.
hour and have a crack. Get some stuff out there, but also give yourself those realistic expectations that this is going to take time. And it's a balancing act because you can become so
Mm.
perfectionist about that. You can become crippled, and you can go, well, until I know exactly what my why is and I've got it in my one sentence and it's absolutely perfect, then I'm just not going to do anything. You don't want to end up there, but at the same time, you want to kind of just humbly engage in what's the next right thing, what's the most responsible way to move forward with what I currently know, while also continuing to do that work of uncovering and exploring and digging around for the things that you're really moving deeper into. Like, I think for me, I feel like I've consistently over the last few years moved closer and closer to my sweet spot and to that connecting the dots stuff and,
Yeah. Awesome.
integration, becoming a more whole person. But I also know that I'm further away now than I will be in a few years. So yeah, just got to keep doing the work.
Mm. That's awesome. That's really good stuff. The self awareness is key. The Enneagram, my wife and I, we've just when I say just, I think in the last probably 6 months or so, we
How
did the
good.
Enneagram test and we've gotten right into that. So every time I do the test, I get either a 3 or a 7.
Oh,
So
my man.
so 7 just like you, and then the 3 side is that the achiever. So that is the side of me that pretty much just wants to win at all
Yes.
costs. Um, but yeah, you're talking about doing the work and things that stand the time. My counselor as well, he kind of just said, you've started all these things that you were at one stage passionate about, but then, I would just stop. And then he's like, you're never going to stay passionate about something if you don't keep doing it, which
Yeah.
I thought was pretty gold. So one of the things that I've been really impacted by and now am doing, like with this podcast, for instance, I just kind of decided, you know what, stuff it. I was really passionate about this at one stage. I'm really passionate about it again now.
Mm.
Why don't I just do it stop overthinking it, interview people that interest me, and I can and have a chat to them, and then find exactly what I want to do along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's some advice I'd give to some people as well. Is I'm a big overthinker, but I also want to do things super fast, which is it's a ridiculous tension in my brain. You don't want to be in my brain at times.
I feel like your brain sounds pretty similar to mine, actually.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we would be. When you were explaining before about how you're a 7, I was like, yep, that is me.
Yep.
I've got that. So yeah, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's that whole, no one's, everything you see around that is quote unquote successful. Someone has put in the work, or people have put in the work to get it there. Nothing's going to come overnight just because you suddenly find your passion.
And
passion,
you have to put stuff out there and learn to, receive critique. And I sort of feel like you can't just emerge one day from a cave and be, your first public sharing of anything is, like a symphony, Mozart symphony or whatever. Like you do have to, like, there is stuff that I put out there publicly now that I'm like, oh geez, I wish there wasn't still evidence of that. I wish I could, delete that. But then I look back at it and I go, actually, you know what? I did that and somehow I kept going, and that has actually enabled me to continue to do that self-edit process, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have kind of just started to do some stuff. So, you have to learn as you go.
And you can flip it as well by going, which is something that I've started to try and get into my own head, is going, like for my example would be this podcast. My first 2 podcast episodes are not going to be the same quality as, say, I don't know if you follow Tim Ferriss or any of these massive podcasters that have done 400, or a Joe Rogan who's done, I think, 2,500 episodes or something.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which is just nuts. Of course you're going to be awesome by the time you get to there. But I'm starting now to look at it as it's a body of work rather than just individual episodes. And so part of that art and the creativeness is that, who knows, in 10 years' time, someone can look at it and go, wow, you know what, Richard took from he listened to the first episode to this one 10 years later, and it gives them the confidence, and it's something that they can look at then and go, wow, this is a document of somebody working hard to make something happen, And so I think when you start thinking about it like that, which I'm starting to do,
for sure.
It's less intimidating to put something out there. You still want to always make it as good as possible, but knowing that, hey, as long as the next one is a little bit better, that's all that matters.
Yeah, 100%. And I think part of the attraction of podcasts anyway, they're the fastest growing media form at the moment. And I think that's partly because they are probably less produced typically than other forms of media.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are some highly produced podcasts, but there are a lot of podcasts, that are really successful, Joe Rogan or whoever, that literally are just people having a conversation, just pursuing, where it goes, as if we're just sitting in the room together having a conversation that would be interesting, even if nobody else ever heard it. And then, people do want to listen to that because it is kind of more real and authentic. And it's part of what I love about it. I love just listening to other people just switch the mics on.
Yeah.
And, interesting people just having interesting conversations.
Chatting. And you feel like you're in the room with them. And it is cool. And the thing I like about the podcast as well is, it's encouraging a lot of, especially like people who like Controversial Guy, but Jordan Peterson, people like that around, who have got these big philosophical discussions that you can't explain it in 4 minutes on Sunrise, or whatever, a morning show. You need a podcast that's going to go for at least an hour and a half to even hope to get your point across. And from what I can understand from what I'm reading on the internet and things like that, quite a lot of these, a lot of celebrities and a lot of people who are just sick of getting their words edited by sort of mainstream media are now only going on people's podcasts and things. And it's pretty incredible.
Yeah,
It's a
gotcha.
bit of I think we're at an interesting time in sort of in media, but also in especially in like journalism and things like that. It's really changing, which is cool. So see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so, do you think you'll be starting up a podcast in the future then?
Yeah, so I've got a couple that are in the works, and I guess I'm lucky. I got a grant from the local council,
Oh, mate, that's great.
basically to produce one, which the concept is it's kind of like if you imagine Humans of New York, and then you put that on the Central Coast, and you mash it up with as if you walked into a poetry slam. So basically, what that looks like is I'm going to interview interesting humans that live in my community. Some of the people that are well known, some people that are totally unknown. You know, a mix of young and old people that have moved here, people that have lived here for a long time. But basically, a mix of interesting humans. I'm going to interview them, and then afterwards, I'm going to write a poem which kind of captures a snapshot of their story. And basically, that's how the podcast will kind of close out. So you have the interview, and then you have kind of this summary
That's
sort of
awesome.
poem.
That sounds great.
Yeah. So, and then I kind of want to basically use that as the platform rather than making, 100 other podcasts. I want to start that on the Central Coast, but then I'll probably continue to use that format and just move into other topics that I'm interested in. At the moment, I'm really challenged by, I guess, gender justice sort of issues, and in particular, like I'm a dad of two little boys, and people generally feel kind of like, oh, if I have a daughter, I'll be, I have to be afraid of what might happen to them. But
Mm.
for me, there's the fear of, well, I don't want my sons to be the ones adding to, the terrible statistics around gender violence and gender injustice. And, so I'd love to do a series of podcasts interviewing women who, I look up to, a whole range, women who are in business and leadership, and women who are full-time parents, and women who have, sort of got a few decades under the belt, and then younger women sort of trying to navigate, what does it look like to grow up in this current cultural moment. So
Mm.
I'd love to do that and kind of just use that same format again, and kind of just continue to kind of mash together people's stories, some of those really pressing issues that we need to kind of continue to have good conversations about, and then how does poetry kind of come and summarize some of those ideas creatively.
Oh, that sounds so good. That's a fantastic idea. I love that that gender issues and that's such a big thing at the moment. And well, it's always been a big thing, and I think it's only becoming more of an issue. So if you can speak into that, that'd be fantastic, and tell the stories of those women, and that sounds great.
Yeah, it's a funny one because that's one where I'm like, I want to be careful. Obviously, it's not like, hey, I'm a man who's going to come along and make a podcast that's going to fix this problem. But, I honestly want to ask, a diversity of women, hey, as a man who has been really challenged about this stuff, and really challenged, personally, like my wife has educated me, and I guess opened my eyes so much to the experience of women, just the everyday experience, and I'll never fully understand it, but just of having to think through things that I've just never had to think through,
Mm.
kind of with some of my, I guess, just default privilege. So I want to ask a variety of women, well, I'm challenged about this stuff, but how can I help? When do I need to speak? When do I need to shut up? What's genuinely helpful for me to say? How can I kind of partner with women, for the sake of, my future sons, and, the world that we're kind of moving towards together.
Because it is extremely can be extremely confusing for blokes, for guys. I've
For
experienced
sure.
that as well, because you're getting there's so many of these different narratives that are getting thrown at us in the media. You know, you've on one side you've got kind of, I don't know if you saw the big outcry against that Gillette ad that came out.
Yeah,
Um, there was that, and I kind of identify with both sides. You know, there's a side that is going, yeah, man, there is definitely a problem here that as males we just don't understand because we're not females and we've never
mm,
lived that way. But then there is also the other side that I have empathy for and sympathize with a bit, where it's going, but you can't paint us all that way, if you know what I mean. And so
yeah,
if what the podcast sounds like it will do is really create awareness, but also just cut out some of that noise, and that somebody
yeah,
can listen and actually listen to a somebody who's going through it and is giving life advice from their own story as well, which that makes a so much bigger impact than just coming from an advertising company or something like that.
yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
yeah, I reckon that'll take off, man. I think that's good.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to getting into it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your podcast. You know, like this is. I'm curious about who some of your other guests are, and I'd love to sort of see some of that journey you were talking about. How does it look from the first episode to one down the track as you continue to hone your concept and but yeah, it's awesome, man. I'm keen.
I think I identified a bit when you were talking about like the humans of New York side. That's something that I really love. It's that, I was trying to think about who are the people that I learn from the most, and how do I learn the most. And if I'm trying to read a business book, I really struggle to just read a business book if it's not a biography of a businessman or a businesswoman.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so, and there's something, especially for me, but I feel like for a lot of people, there's something about somebody's story that
Yeah,
is a lot easier to engage with and to learn from than just words on a page or some theory. Um, and so I guess that's what I'm trying to do here, is just get people like yourself who are doing good things, have really cool dreams and visions in their heart, to just tell their story and where that comes from, rather than just, hey, I'm an expert, here's some advice.
yes,
And so yeah, as I was saying, I still don't know what that looks like. Obviously, I could use a bit of lead by story to communicate that a bit more better, and I'll probably be in touch about that one. But yeah, it's just one step at a time, one guest at a time,
for
and
sure.
keep moving forward. That's all you can do. So good stuff. Well, we might wrap it up there if that's all right with you. Um, this has
Yeah,
been
man.
so
Yeah,
good.
definitely.
I reckon we should.
I feel filled up. That was a good conversation. I got a lot out of
Yeah,
that.
well, I'm glad. I'm glad you did. So thank you so much, mate, for being on the show. It's a real privilege to have you on. Someone who doesn't even live in Brisbane. So thanks, man. It was really good.
The modern world, hey. It's sounds like such an old person thing to say, but
Oh,
it is amazing to be able to
yeah.
like we never met each other and with hundreds of kilometers apart, but here we are just having a good chinwag like best buds.
I felt like an old fella this afternoon when I was flipping out trying to figure out how to get Skype going and what I needed and all this sort of thing. I was like, gosh, man, I
Yeah,
need to be more in touch with what's going on. That's for sure. But that's all good. We made it, I reckon. So, mate, until next time, really looking forward to hearing the podcast, seeing how Lead by Story starts to take off. Sounds like you're already doing amazing things in that space. And one more thing, what's the best place for people to find you online? Do you have a website on Facebook?
yeah. So there are two websites, which I know is kind of like it runs against all the having clarity and sort of being consolidating things, but I guess the first website is really about my own poetry and books and work as a spoken word artist and a writer. So that's just willsmall.com.au. And, there's like blog posts and videos of poems and all of that up there. And then leadbystory.com.au is where to head if you're interested in, getting some help with some of that stuff around how to really figure out in your context, whether it's a business or whether you're a teacher or whether you're a creative who's got a dream, how to really use those communication skills, whether your goal is to get funding or whether your goal is to grow your audience. All of those sort of things. So leadbystory.com.au. And then you can probably find me on Facebook and all of that. The thing is, my name is not very Googleable, because if you just write Will Small, it starts to like auto predict questions, will small rabbits pop out of the ground, like things like that. So it's an unfortunate name in that regard, but it's the name my mama gave me, so I'm grateful for it.
Can't change. That's all right. I'm sure one day it'll be top of the Google search. So it's all good.
We'll see.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, mate, thanks again for being on the show, and really excited for what you're going to do in the future.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for reaching out, and look forward to listening to more of your episodes as they come. All the best with it.
No worries at all. Thanks, mate. Hey guys, I just want to say a massive thank you for listening. It truly does mean the world to me that you would take time out of your busy day and listen to this podcast. I really value your support and really need your feedback in order to make this the best possible podcast for you. So please send me a Facebook message or an email with feedback. It can be constructive or criticism. It doesn't matter. I just want to make this the best it can possibly be for you guys. And also, feel free to recommend some guests. I'm always looking to talk to interesting people, and I need input to find those people. So thanks again. I'm not very good at doing these outros, obviously, but hey, episode 2, it can only get better from here. I hope you have an awesome week, and I look forward to talking to you soon in episode 3.